Hi, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for coming to LudoNarraCon. Thank you for coming to our panel. This is the joys of diverse romancing games. We've just been told we're the biggest panel, so we give most value, even though we're free. We are going to start tonight by going around and saying hello. There are lots of us, so bear with us. And everyone is going to talk a little as they introduce themselves, please, about a game romance they have written that they love the most. And I'll go to Tanya first.
Oh no!
Yes.
Hello, I'm Tanya. Tanya X Short. I'm the captain of Kit Fox Games. They're a small indie studio in Montreal, Canada. And most recently, we released Boyfriend Dungeon, which I was the lead designer and main writer for. And we're working on a big update right now. So if you haven't played it yet and you want to get the before update experience, now's the time to be the cool one that played it before everyone saw all the new content. Anyway, I think my favorite romance that I wrote in Boyfriend Dungeon, it sounds strange, but Sawyer the Glaive is a wonderful non-binary youngin who's far too young for me to date myself. I don't feel romantically about them. But they have such a crystal clear voice to me as a writer that they are the easiest one to write. I've gone back and written new scenes for all the characters in the update, and they just like fly into my brain and into the game with no effort.
Onto the page. Yes.
And I love them platonically very much.
We'll hear more about Sawyer, I think. Danny, you next.
Hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Launders. I am the lead producer, writer of Validate Shirley Singles in Your Area. Really big visual novel that's coming out this summer. So let's just validate on Steam. I'm also a writer on Spirit Swap that's also coming out this year or next year. So I write a lot of romance. But my favorite romance that I've written, I am the writer of Malik. He's one of the characters in Validate. My favorite romance I've written is his romance with Rocky, another one of our characters. I really like that it shows his progression as a character and how he's learning that he's bisexual. I think those kind of stories are really important to tell.
That's fabulous. I got way about it. And I've heard about Spirit Swap because it's beats to match 3-2, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. The soundtrack is so good. So I can't wait to play that as well. I will throw to you, Luther.
Hello, everyone. My name is Luther Patenji. I am the writer and designer on Ambition, a Minuet, and Power. It's a romantic revolutionary visual novel set in 18th century Paris. He plays an unmarried woman of fashion clawing her way to the top of society. If I had to pick, like, obviously it's really hard because I love all my characters, but like if I had to pick someone, I would say that writing Honorad, the wealthy widow's like romance arc, has been one of my favorite experiences. I really liked making a story about, spoiler alert, a sexually dominant character who's still as riddled with flaws, insecurities, and like long personal history as every other kind of person, because I find that a lot of stories about those kind of characters tends to put them on this like pedestal of perfection and like commandingness that I think is, I don't know, a little, it doesn't feel right. And I prefer when people fall in love with someone who feels human. So yeah.
Yes. And diversity and variety is the human experience, isn't it? And that's what we're all about. I will introduce myself briefly because I didn't do it properly. My name's Hannah Flynn. I'm communications director at Fell Better Games. We are the makers of Fall in London, which is a browser game. And on Steam, you would recognize Sunless Sea, Sunless Skies, and our upcoming romantic detective story visual novel, Mask of the Rose, upon which my colleague, my esteemed and trusted colleague, James, is one of the writers. James.
Hi, yeah, I'm James Chu. I'm a senior writer at Velveta and currently one of the writers on Mask of the Rose. I think probably my favorite romance I've written was A Sexy Priest. I should say to this like at least a year before Phoebe Waller-Bridge.
Yes, you got there first.
I know, and
damn
she
it,
got all the
Fleabag.
But he was this like quite innocent character who sort of, in our setting, devils and hell are kind of a literal, actual concept, and he's figuring out what that means for him as sort of an Anglican vicar in training, and the player kind of introduce themselves as a source of possible kind of guidance and maybe temptation for him, but he doesn't feel much remorse about it. So it's really fun to kind of explore this sort of quite sweet, quite gentle character who's also very much got one foot in the infernal. But the reaction to him was incredible. Like, I hadn't expected. I assume this was quite a niche thing for me to write.
Sorry, what game was that?
This is Fallen London. This is one of our
Okay.
exceptional stories, our subscriber stories. But no, I've had such nice feedback on him that we've kind of added him to extra stories and like extra story arcs we've kind of drawn out from him as a result of that. So yeah, definitely my favorite.
What's his name?
He's the intrepid deacon because we use kind of
Oh.
adjective noun combinations in Fallen London.
Yeah, he was an absolute. As soon as he was out of the gate to our subscribers, so in Fallen London, you can become an exceptional friend. So you pay a monthly cost and get a story from us every month, along with some perks. And as soon as he was out of the gate, the support tickets, the Discord, the wave of like pure like thank you that came in off the back of the Deacon. It was unbelievable actually to watch, which is, you know, that's what we want. That's what we like.
Oh yeah, nothing is better than seeing like romantic fan art of characters you've written. It's like it's heart stopping. It's awesome.
Romantic, yes. I draw the line at explicitly sexual.
I do not.
I mean,
I'm
okay with it in my downtime. Cool. In my, you know, I'm browsing Tumblr for work. I don't need to see that many tentacles. I'm good.
Yeah, I must admit that my choice of character probably was at least subconsciously influenced by the community as well. Sawyer is a community favorite as well. Yeah,
Malik is community favorite as well.
Honorod's a community favorite, with a second runner-up being our priest, actually, Ludovico, where I had many people be like, Luther, how did you write such a good bookish dork? I'm like, I am bookish.
Well, you know, write what you know, I guess. Talking about which, let's get into the processes that we have for writing romancing games. I want to talk about the kind of freedoms that the format of being in a game offers us as game developers, and you know the limitations of game romance. I know from Fallen London we have, and Sunless Sea and Sunless Skies, we have numerous romances, we have numerous encounters, and some of the process difficulties I think we've had across writing lots of different ones was not making them feel either samey or kind of forced, because people in our games like to have this option of romancing as many people as they kind of can or as they want. So you process wise, that means you have to kind of establish upfront how much we're willing to give any romanceable character the same amount of potential romance. And I think it's something that we've developed quite a nuanced approach to. James, I don't know if you want to start by kind of following that up.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say one of the things that kind of we think about when creating characters actually is, are they romanceable? And if not, why not kind of creating characters who aren't romanceable and kind of being explicit about that up front is quite important. I think adding that kind of slightly perverse for talk on kind of diversity in romance, but having characters who are willing to kind of go against what the player might wish, I think is important to kind of provide that context in games and make it more kind of surprising and more delightful when there are kind of a range of options, and some you might not expect. Like in Sunless Skies, we had quite unusual, I would say, romance options from the kind of coterie of your officers, the kind of key characters that join you on that journey. One was a kind of clay conductor, this sort of very grumpy, cantankerous character. We thought it might be quite surprising and might be quite fun if he's one of the romance options, but that's buried quite a bit in the kind of narrative arc he's involved in. So there's sort of a surprise and sense of discovery, and then it kind of leads the player to wonder, well, what else haven't I seen? What else have I not explored enough to kind of unlock these options in the game? So we kind of try and keep it fresh for ourselves in terms of kind of where in various character arcs romance might be possible, and then which characters, and try and surprise the player and ourselves with that.
Surprising yourself. That's, you know, that's one of the big challenges. It's kind of hard. Danny, how about you? What's your sort of process on approaching balancing and developing different romances in your games?
So with Validate, we wanted to have like a really realistic game. So we basically were just like, what is the worst thing that happened to us while we were on a date? And let's put it in a game. And we basically did that because I feel like a lot of romance in games is very superficial. It's very meet cute. It's like not really realistic, which is fine. There's an audience for that. But we wanted to make a game that is like very realistic to what it's like to be in your 20s and date. As someone who's in their 20s, the dating pool got piss in it. Like, it's awful. Like, we wanted to really convey what it's like. What
Tell
it's
it.
like.
It ain't wrong.
I'm very glad that I've eschewed the entire modern dating scene by getting married in a very gay way about 11 years ago and not worrying about it since. I'm sorry, and I
Congrats to
thank you.
you.
I thank you for your efforts to portray it so I can understand it.
Yeah, no. So yeah, we really wanted to show what it's like for different people to approach dating and how they do so. So that's why we set it up in a way where you play as one of our characters and then you romance slash friend 5 other of our characters. We wanted to do a POV style type writing because we thought that being able to see the world through someone else's eyes is super important, especially when it comes to dating, because we all have different perspectives of how we go about things.
Yeah. And how about you, Tanya?
I think I find it's a double-edged sword that we chose a very kind of traditional visual novel setup. Like, we had so many other innovations. We were like, okay, let's just do this the out of the box way. Okay, you get 4 dialogue options max. You're playing sort of yourself almost, with a couple of little bells and whistles of your implied character traits. You have like anxiety-ish at the beginning, and that's kind of it. And that has its benefits and its drawbacks. Like, the benefits are that I don't really have to think about it anymore. Like, now, like, when I'm working on this update, I can just like type out a scene, and there's almost no question about like what kinds of options should I offer. How long should it be? How long is a certain message? That kind of thing. The drawback, and actually there is a benefit there too, where if I'm a player, a dialogue option can present something I wouldn't necessarily have thought of. Like, if I'm watching a movie or reading a book, if there's an option there or if a character says something that I find strange, then I might just think it's a weird thing for that character, or I might think it's a bad piece of writing. But if something sort of jumps out at it for me as a player in a game, I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna try role playing as someone who would say this. I'm gonna be extra flirty, even though in real life there's no way I would say that. Wow. But then the drawback is that, dialogue options don't let the player be creative. And if there's something they really, really want to say that isn't encaptured by one of those 4 options, they can feel, it's constrained is too light a word. They can really almost feel censored, that like, well, why can't I comment on this? Or why can't I ask them about that? Or why can't I, like, they clearly are hitting on me. Why can't I kiss them right now? And so it's like beyond suspension of disbelief into like suspension of agency almost, in the very basic, if you're not very careful about how you're writing your romance scenes in a visual novel format, I think.
Yeah. How did you find that, Luther?
I would say that so the first thing that comes to mind is, like, I will say my my writing style has been highly influenced by like John Ingold's accept, reject, deflect methodology that keeps scenes moving forward. I really like it a lot. When it comes to keeping characters, making sure that they all feel different in tone and personality, I spend a lot of time thinking about like character voice. Like, how does this person talk? Alex, one of our characters, he's in the military. Like, he has a very particular way of speaking. There'll be little words that work their way into his thing. He's like, oh, well, what's our plan of attack on this?
Right.
And it's just like something like that. And Ludovico, the priest, is from Italy, so occasionally, like, when he's surprised, bits of Italian will come out of his mouth because everyone flips to their mother tongue when they are like so shocked by something. And so, like, when we do a visual lineup of our characters in the art phase, we're of course putting everyone side by side on like a height lineup and seeing, like, does everyone look visually distinct? Do they pass the silhouette test? Does everyone what about everyone's color palettes? Can you reduce those and still recognize everyone? And I think it's important to do that when you write your characters as well. Just ask basic questions about them, like, Who's a morning person? Write that up. What's their favorite food? Da, da, da. How do they react when enraged? Like things like that. And if you start to see the same answers across the lineup over and over again, maybe it's time to rethink some of these characters.
Yeah, we actually
Yeah.
approached it from like you're talking about a cast lineup situation for the personality archetypes. Like we actually used the Big Five motivational theory. I don't know if y'all know that from Wikipedia, but
No,
I find
tell
it
us about
useful. So it's just the 5 axes, like scientifically used by psychologists to describe the general population. So one axis, for example, is agreeable versus disagreeable, and like on average, like by definition, like most people are in the middle. They're not particularly agreeable or particularly disagreeable. But it's always among those 5 big axes. Your characters, to be memorable, usually they should be strongly on one side or the other, and most people are. They have 1 or 2 axes that they tend to be outliers in. And so I went through that and I designed all the characters, but then I found after I had written their first drafts, they all sounded the same. They all sounded like me. Like I had started out with strong voices, and then they sort of collapsed towards Tanya. Like that's like the gravity well is like Tanya's voice. And so I had to go back and like rebuff out, like, oh no, this person's much more disagreeable. Oh, this person's much more extroverted, or that sort of thing.
Yeah, all points trend towards Tanya.
When I'm the writer, yes.
It is hard, especially when you're banging out like an extra few pages at 11 at night and you're like not thinking completely, and then you wake up in the morning like, this is just Luther.
Should we talk a bit more about casts of characters then? Because I feel like all of our games have a really different set of potential amours and options, and I mean, I'm just trying to think of the types that we have on offer in Mask of the Rose of people to talk to. And one of them is a giant bat in a cape. So
amazing.
And he is, among the most kind of fascinating and certainly because Mask of the Rose is based in a universe where we have players who've been enjoying Fallen London as a browser game for like 12 years and have been going, Masters dating sim when? Masters dating sim when? And this guy, Mr. Pages, is one of these mysterious kind of masters of London. We've been able to kind of offer, the ability to smooch him for the first time, which people have collectively lost their nut over, which is, great. Luther's excited about it.
I have a quick question. Given that he's a bat person, does that mean he's upside down? So you recreate the Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire upside down kiss? Like that's got to be like day 1, 8 o'clock stuff, right?
It's the main question. It's important stuff. This is it. This is the real groundwork that we've been doing.
I will say it's been answered because I read it today. Emily Short has written scenes around him. I cannot reveal the nature of that answer, but I can say that there is one.
Yeah, it's logistical. Let's put it that way. I mean, he's a bat, I should say, not a bat person. So he is a bat. So that's what we're working with technically. But then we have characters and personality types, ages, orientations, gender presentations across the spectrum, which is, I think, we're talking about the joys of diverse romancing games. The fact that our characters not only will want to or not want to get into it with you romantically as the player, but they also have their own kind of romantic interests among the character pool. And you can, in our game, hold back and matchmake other characters with each other. You cannot push someone into doing something that they don't want to do. Mask of the Rose was primarily like structurally written by Emily Short, who is like a complete genius of conversation-based games, and she's kind of put in there decision making on the behalf of the characters where they can hesitate before agreeing with you, and that's not just a pause that we've put in using programming, it's them thinking about it using thoughts. So we have like a wonderfully complicated diagram of X's and O's and crosses and connections that I just can't wait for people to discover all of it. Danny, can I ask you about your full cast of characters? Like, we've heard about a couple of them. What kind of range are you going for? Like, what have you got in the mix?
So we have 13 playable characters. They're not all coming out at release because that is insane.
13 playable characters. Okay.
Yes. So I released we have 4. So our 4 for volume 1 is Anaya, Isabel, Malik, and Amhari. Just between the 4, Malik, he is the manager at Popeyes. He's a SoundCloud rapper. Like he is just a Sagittarius man. Anaya, she was a former food blogger. Former STEM blogger. She's a current food blogger. So she's an influencer on Instagram. She cooks. She hosts cooking shows. And she's currently dealing with trying to fight for her life and not curse people out who critique her technique. Isabel, she's a theater teacher. She's a 27-year theater teacher who never really got to live her dreams on Broadway, so she's living them out through her theater kids, which does not end well for her. And Amhari, she's an HR specialist who has 2 sons, and she recently just got divorced, and he is just trying to figure it out. So a lot of our characters in Validate are just literally trying to figure it out. We have people who literally are personal trainers to marriage counselors. We have a whole bunch of people with different backgrounds. Everyone in Validate is queer. We really want to focus on that. And then Validate is majority people of color, besides our 1 Italian character. We had to put our Italian in there somehow. Shout out to Italy, for real. But even though I don't like him, but it's fine. It's fine.
It's okay to not like some of them, right? You have to have a different relationship.
There's some characters I'm just I do not like you at all, but you're still in my game. We wanted to make this realistic as possible because sometimes there are people you just do not like because they act crazy. And in all of that, we just really want to focus on people being real and real romance. So with, I mentioned earlier, Malik and Rocky have a route. In our demo, you play as Malik and as he tries to romance Rihi. And it doesn't really end up that well. It depends on your choice. We give you a choice to either romance or, be friends. So yeah.
It's wonderful to listen to you talking about real people and real jobs and real things happening, because I live in a world where London was stolen by bats and lives in a cavern and it's bleak and everybody's eating mushrooms and complaining all the time, and it's not. And this is life. This is life. Wonderful. I feel enriched even hearing about it.
Yeah, I mean, we're somewhere in between, right? We theoretically have dates that are normal, going to restaurants and seeing the sun occasionally. It does happen, yeah. But at the same time, we also have people turning into weapons. And that was part of the cast creation, actually, was we had to make sure we had a diversity of human types, but also a diversity of weapon types. So some swords, some dagger, pole arms, and now our update's gonna have a hammer and an axe. And thinking about how do they feel about that? If you could turn into a weapon and you could you had to turn into a hammer and other people turned into swords, how would you feel? Which realism isn't possible, but but realistic emotional journeys, I guess, is what all of us try to strive for, even in the most fantastical situations.
Yeah, one thing that I loved about Boyfriend Dungeon, not to be a fangirl, but there was consequences when you when one of your romantic partner did something, there were consequences to their actions. And I really do love consequences in storylines, especially romance games, because a lot of romance games just even if you cheat on me with my great aunt, there's no consequences. I still love you. In Boyfriend, there were consequences. You had a choice to not pursue that if you didn't like something they did, which I really enjoyed.
Thank you. I'm curious what you're talking about exactly. We'll have to talk about it afterwards, so we don't spoil anything.
Yes.
I think it's true. I think it's like you say, you have to have characters in there that you don't like. You have to have consequences that aren't necessarily positive. This is just it's good game design, right? You need that that salt in there that people can. It's something for someone to talk about with someone else. People in our.
I think I always end up loving my romantic interests, though. If I write them, there's something about them that I do love. I mean, maybe I like everybody. That is a problem, actually. I do when I first meet someone, I'm you're the coolest, best person I've ever met. And it's toned down over the years. Yeah, it was much stronger when I was a teenager, but I get a little bit of that with my romantic interests when I write them. That I'm oh, but this person, they're so whatever. Like, it doesn't matter what adjective it is. If they have that adjective, I'm like, oh, wow.
You're the most unlikable person I've ever written. Oh, I love you.
You'd be amazed how often a character written as an absolute garbage person can pick up an unusual fan following.
Yes.
My antagonist has a fan club. Yeah,
Mhm.
I will admit. And then they weren't intended as a romantic interest, so I never did get very interested in them. But
Love
my
finds
community
a way.
loves them. Yeah, love does find a way. And unfortunately,
The gamer
Yeah.
horn finds a way. Like, we have to confront the horn constantly. The people have been begging us to
Embrace it.
shag a bat for so long that you're just like, okay, all
Why
right,
not?
it's on the table. It's on the table.
It's consensual. It's fine.
We don't judge.
Yeah.
Everyone here is an adult. The bat is. How old are the masters, James?
Many
Old.
lots.
They're grown. Yeah. And that's interesting because there's a kind of within our kind of cast of characters, one person is Horatia. She's the person who runs the house that you live in. One person is a medical student, Archie. One person works for the masters, Grizz. So there are lots of people with different levels of power, and the character with the most power is Mr. Pages, because this group of people, this group of interlopers who've taken over London, have installed themselves as kind of a ruling class, a very small group of ruling people who just arbitrarily make rules all the time and do whatever they like. So there's a real negotiation of what's appropriate and like non-gross to have any kind of relations with that character, because they are, it'd be like working for the Prime Minister and then just getting
You've
into bed
already
with
made
him.
me feel grossed out working for the Prime Minister of the UK.
I was thinking
Yeah.
of Hugh
Pages
Grant in
are
Love
preferable.
Actually. I was not thinking of the actual dirtbag Prime Minister that we have. Yeah, I'm trying to think of any other interesting contrasts in the romances that we have in Mask of the Rose, James. I don't know if anything jumps to mind.
Well, I was going to say, like, I think a thing about Mask of the Rose is like our cast is kind of operating on two axes, because you've got kind of there's kind of a range of characters, including Mr. Page as the aforementioned bat, but we've got kind of a range of characters who are in the know, as it were, about how the whole world works. They're kind of either they're clay people, they're golem-like characters, or they're rubbery men made of tentacles, and they're new to London, but they're not new to kind of how all this works. And so kind of a lot of it is about sort of the player kind of getting to know them and interacting with them. And so they're operating kind of a whole different knowledge level. Whereas in the cast itself, the kind of more human cast, there's quite a lot of diversity in terms of I'm a sick man, reformed Jewish brother and sister. We've got kind of the Anglicans represented by Theophilus. Different people are coming up to kind of different belief systems. And so they're kind of on the same level in terms of what they know about how things are working, but they're coming out from such different perspectives that kind of achieving a commonality, a unity of approach is immersed. The player is kind of always negotiating these differences in how people are reacting to kind of the possibility of romance, how they understand romance from kind of a Victorian perspective, or a difference in that Victorian perspective, or from something other altogether, and then kind of broader context that they find themselves.
What kinds of historical perspectives did you deal with in Ambition, Luther?
Well, for one, I'd spent a lot of time doing research because I wanted to try and convey that as faithfully as possible. It's funny you're talking about political perspectives, because in Ambition, every single one of the romance options is aligned with one of the political factions in the game and kind of serves as their representative. So we have like our two queer romance options are pretty different people, where you have Elizabeth, who is actually Elizabeth Viggy Lebrun, the actual painter. She kind of represents the royalist faction because she was the queen's personal painter in real life. You also have Honorad, the widow, who represents the bourgeoisie. Her husband, who left her a lot of money, was a wealthy but non-title businessman. You have Louis Antoine de Saint-Just, who represents the revolutionaries. In the real world, he would go on to become called the Archangel of Death and was the main architect of the Great Terror. But he's also a sexy bad boy. Let's roll with that. You have
Nothing.
I mean, Angel of Death is just asking to get kissed. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. You have Ludovico, who represents the church, who are, of course, a massive political power at the time. And he is like, from Italy, sent by the Vatican to observe things. And you also have Thomas Alexandre Dumas, or just Alex, who is the famous author's father, who would
Yeah.
actually go on to
Dumas.
be, yeah, he's great.
Woo!
Yeah,
And
Dumas.
yeah, he would actually go on in real life to be the first Black general in modern European history. Like, he is a
He's
really
amazing.
big deal, and has and his life actually is the inspiration for most of his son's writing, like including the Count of Monte Cristo and the Three Musketeers. Like, all of it's based on his dad. And he's a really neat freaking dude. And it's funny, I was realizing this as I was writing the game, that every single one of our romance options represents a social scandal of one sort or another. Because like, for one, you have like the obvious one, dating Ludovico. You're dating a priest. What are you doing? The other one is like dating two women, and in the case of Elizabeth, she's married, but like, this was a time of serial adultery. It was really normal, so people just kind of rolled with it. You have dating Alex. Alex is a Black man, and like, that was, even in Alex's real life, was a source of social scandal. Didn't stop him, but it was a thing. You have dating Antoine, who is a hardcore revolutionary, and like, his entire real world romantic history is incredible, and definitely involves getting arrested and put in a sanitarium at least once. But and then the most non-scandalous option is actually staying with your fiance, who has his own serious bag of problems attached to him. One of them is that he starts the game by abandoning you in Paris. So, you want to go back to that or not?
Oh, rude.
But yeah, so like, going through those and seeing like where everyone sits on the social power structure was really interesting, because it was, as a time defined by incredible inequality. We sometimes joke that Ambition is the game that we did not intend to be political when we started in 2017, but just became more and more relevant as time went on against our will. And it was just like, well, all art is political. I guess we're doing this now. And like, so,
Lean in.
like, yeah, it's like, what a story.
So you're gonna sell little like plush guillotines and.
I mean, I really want to bring back the guillotine earrings from the era that had like the.
Let's talk about merch.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh my god.
There are people on Etsy who want to make that for you right now. Etsy, call us. Type. Scandal. The idea of scandal in these games is really interesting, I think, because there's your personal reaction to the romance. The other character's reaction to your romance is really interesting. Where in Mask of the Rose, other characters can kind of get pissed off at you for things that you've done. If they're friends with a character that you've interacted with, and you've like cussed this other person out or done something that will piss them off, they will find out about it from that friendship without you necessarily knowing that will happen. And the next time you see them, they might start the scene like with their arms crossed, like at you, and you might not quite realize what you've done, which is nice. I like that, the idea that consequences is, like we were saying, consequences are the spice of life in these games, I think.
We realized we wanted to have a little bit of diversity in the obviously, if we have 7 romanceable characters at launch and we're aiming for 9 with a bonus sort of 10, but that's not being announced yet. So we wanted each of them to feel really different, right? We didn't want to just it seems like you're romancing the same person and it always follows the same beats. And so we did some basic ones, like, okay, there's a sexy scene with most of them. They shouldn't all happen on date 5 or 6 out of 6, right? Like, some of them happen on date 2 or date 3 or date 4, or multiple times or something like that. But we realized that we were more constrained by the expectations of the game overall than we initially thought. Just because when people play Boyfriend Dungeon, if they get really attached to a character, it feels like love should be able to conquer all. Like, it feels like, unless there is a true problem, you should be able to have a happy resolution with this person and love them. And so there is one character who has no matter what, it is an unresolvable problem that you cannot help them with, and they will break up with you, basically. And we really thought we would get a hate campaign as a result, but thank goodness, no, it was fine. The controversy was something else entirely, which we don't need to get into. But I would have felt wrong making that and all the other characters, because all the other characters don't have this like fundamental flaw that is unreachable for the player, and so it feels like a betrayal of their romantic fantasy expectations for then the character to be like, I spent a lot of time with you, but you're just not cool enough. Or that's what it would feel like, even if there was other emotional logic going on.
Yeah, like with Validate, we don't care. Sorry, we do care, but we don't care about the players. Like, we kind of are writing the story as the person. We don't really. So one thing about one of our characters, Isabel, she is super dramatic. You can instantly ruin your date if you choose the wrong option. Like, that's an instant end. And we did it like that way because that's just how people are. Like, sometimes you can be going super well with someone and all you have to do is say one bad thing and it's a wrap. Like, it's done. And we wanted to do something a little different than really favor the players, because we wanted to make sure that what we're the story that we're telling is a realistic story. And usually when some people have the players in mind, it kind of takes away from the story they're telling. Not all the time, but sometimes. With us, we were just we're just gonna write the story. These decisions are gonna happen. It might piss some people off. It might make some people cry, but it's gonna happen regardless, because that's just the story we want to tell.
I love that. I love to leave instructions, and at this point, we really want them to cry.
I mean, the thing is you've got to have people experiencing the full range of emotion with your games, because that's just if everything feels at a certain emotional tempo all the time, then it feels like nothing. I mean, in Ambition, multiple characters can die before the game is over, including the player. And I think that, my whole philosophy with that was every story outcome should feel interesting. It doesn't always be what the player wanted, but I specifically spent a lot of time writing over the scene where it is possible to be guillotined at the game, to be all right, this should still feel like you finish it up and go, okay, that was tragic, but that was still a good, interesting ending to the story. You don't want people to be like, oh, I got the bad end, go to the end now, or go to the load screen, flip it up again.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that is part of the form, isn't it? That people may have in their brains. I'm going to go through this game. I like it enough. I'm going to play it more than once. I assume that then I'm going to collect 10 endings, and the first one I get will be kind of crummy, but eventually I'll get to the true, and it doesn't have to be that way. In Mask of the Rose, you can play it more than once and pursue more than one route, and also because it's a murder mystery as well, you get different information and you find out more nuance and different stuff about the murder mystery outcome the more times that you play it as well. So it rewards multiple playthroughs, but there isn't a hard nonary game, zero escape kind of you haven't got this one ending where you're on the moon or whatever. Zero escape offers us.
Endings are actually a really interesting topic for a romance game. I was going to comment that we had multiple endings up until the last few months when we started beta testing, and then we decided, in the interests of respecting players' time, we would collapse it down a bit. And then so you can finish the game with your one true love if that's what you want. You can max up to everybody or nobody as a love interest or as a platonic interest, and then you can just reload your save from right before the final boss and max everybody that you want to, and then finish it again. But there's no incentive to 100% the game at the moment. We're debating doing that in an update eventually, but
yeah, we're the opposite. We have 62 endings in the first volume of Validate.
Woo!
Wow.
Zoot alors.
Yeah, have fun finding them all.
Are you still having fun writing these endings? Are you enjoying it?
No, everything's already completely written. We plan to have this many endings because Validate, it's 4 characters, so 4 playable characters with 7 routes each.
Wow.
So it's intro, 5 dating option, epilogue. Intro, epilogue have 1 ending. And then the 5 dating options has a range from 2 to like 4. So obviously we didn't mean for it to get this big, but it kind of did, and like it's working. Like it's not like, oh, this is like not a thing for us, but have fun finding them all. I made it. We did a lot of them because we wanted to like really explore how crazy we can be as human beings.
Did you find the limit, do you think, of crazy? The limit
yes.
does not exist.
I'm gonna say, are you? Unless someone's on the moon, it ain't the limit of crazy.
I mean, we have a route that a character asks another character to marry them after knowing them for like 2 days. So it's that crazy.
I like that. That's my kind of crazy. I'm going to jump in right now and say, if anybody has a question, I will try and take questions from the chat before we wrap up. So because there's a delay, start typing your questions now, and then we'll come back around. There's one more thing we wanted to kind of talk about, which was inspirations that we've taken from other media for the kinds of romances that we're writing. And I want to go to James because James's media may be a bit more historical than everyone else's. I don't know. What do you think, James?
Actually, now I feel like I'm going to disappoint you, but I was going to suggest, in a kind of misspent youth, I spent a lot of time in kind of the Baldur's Gate modding community, which had such a fanficky approach to extending the game. Like lots of mods are kind of about like adding content, adding new characters, whereas this whole approach was, what if we kind of dig into this random guard somewhere and give him a romance option, and like give loads of reflective choices for the player to kind of really like, we can write a book about you. This like little couple of kind of bards will follow you around for the entire game, just added by a mod, slowly kind of embellishing your legend for you, or kind of random characters you'll meet will suddenly have like so very little context in the kind of base game, but the mod will add kind of this massive kind of tragic love story that's all about kind of making the player think about, well, who am I? Kind of, this is adding so much more context to the choices I'm making in the main game, and that kind of approach of wanting to provide context and reflectivity and just extend the setting as much as possible is something that I'm realizing now I'm doing a visual novel I've like taken from this ancient community.
I love that. God bless the modding scene. Anyone
That
else?
was how I felt about Elder Scrolls back in the day, like Morrowind. Like finding fan mods of Morrowind was very empowering, and seeing imaginations of the minor characters, like you were saying.
For me, my inspirations are a lot of shows. Biggest inspirations, the show Insecure, a Black Lady sketch show, Atlanta on FX, a bunch of other like realistic shows. Also Abbott Elementary, obviously, amazing show. Go watch it, please. I saw like how people portray romance, like realistic romance in these shows, and I was like, I could just make a game about that. And I literally did. Especially with Insecure, like you really see the progression of the main character from like when she was with her really bad ex-boyfriend to when she is like the owner of her company. Like you see the progression of like years and years of progress. And I really liked seeing that because like in a lot of games, we only see the character for a certain amount of time. Like, and usually the time period is like very short, like it's like a couple months at most. And I wanted to do a different kind of storytelling where you see them over the course of 2 years. So Validate is from 2019 to late 2020 with no pandemic, because I don't believe in putting pandemic media in media. I think it's kind of dumb. We're still in a pandemic. Like, I know what it's like. So it's just like, I wanted to tell a story about progression and how people mature, become themselves in the course of 2 years.
Amazing. And before we get into more influences, we did have a question, which is about polyamory in romantic games. Has anyone touched on polyamory in their content?
Polyarmory.
Hey! Thank you for the pun, Nick. Luther, you said one of your roots is about dating two people.
There are a bunch of places it touches on. One of them it touches on one of the conceivable endings in Ambition is referred to as the emigre ending, which is if you play your cards right, you can just get the hell out of Paris before everything burns, which was a thing a lot of people did. Sometimes you should just run. run. Like that, take the money and run is a very viable option during many of history's crises. But one of them is Elizabeth. You have to be okay with that because she is in fact a married woman, and when you engage with that romance with her, it's a thing she herself even says is like, what about having to be in love with one person, expecting them to satisfy every single part of your romantic needs? What about that is fair? What about that makes sense? And like whether or not you agree with her is something you're going to have to square yourself with as a player. And like I thought that was just something like people even in that time period were talking about this and were thinking about this. And I think putting that in that context is nice because we often think about it as like this new modern invention. It's not modern at all.
Yeah, that's very true. And someone else was asking about, do we see that player sexuality as a good thing or a problem? And I'm assuming that is the player's kind of own thing that they bring to the table. I think very briefly we could maybe answer this. Did anybody have a thought?
Yes, I have a thought. I think that when it comes to character sexuality, and player sexuality, it's like we have to be a little more careful about that, and especially when it comes to writing, because a lot of the times people fall short of like realizing that like character sexuality is like a whole thing. Like it's something that's like established or characters realize as they as you play them. But a lot of times it feels like some games give like everyone's like straight at first, and then they slowly start making their characters more and more queer as the game gets a little more popular or as things go on. I'm just like,
Yeah,
what's the point of doing that? Like in Validate, like it's just like, sure, like everyone, like I said, everyone's queer, but there's a progression. You see a character go from straight and then they have gay experiences and then they're no longer straight at the end. And also you see characters who may think they're like gay or like, and then they realize, hey, maybe I'm thinking about this in a different way. Or, sometimes gender happens, like people enter their transgender era, like, things like that. So
gender
like,
has been known to happen.
I was about to say sometimes gender happens might be my quote of the day, actually. I really
yeah, sometimes
gender
like
happens.
they just
All the genders.
You go
That's
see
wonderful.
a movie, you're just like, wait, why do I want to look like him? Like that kind of stuff.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, so much. We have our indication that we are wrapped up here. I will very quickly remind everybody that this is part of LudoNarraCon, and you can go and enjoy the sale panel where we are, the sale area where all of our games are available, at least as a demo. That's Boyfriend Dungeon, Mask of the Rose, Validate, and Ambition and Minuet in Power. And thank you so much for your comments. And we had a comment that says this panel is fantastic, and everybody had a lovely time. So good. I'm very glad. We love you. Please check out our games. Thank you for coming. And we will see you next time at LudoNarraCon. Bye.
Bye.